Okay, thank you, but just a technical difficulty. I have a message in the middle of the screen, so I can't see everyone. Thank you. Much better. Welcome everyone to our special council meeting this Tuesday, August 10th, 2021. Before I start, I will remind council that this portion of the meeting is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube. And I will start with a roll call for the benefit of the public watching the meeting. I, Mayor Shantz, am present and chairing this meeting. Councillor Martin.
Present.
Councillor McMillan.
Present.
Councillor Merlehan.
Present.
Councillor Redekop.
Present.
And Councillor Shantz.
Present.
Thank you. Can I have a motion that council reconvenes in open, please? Moved by Councillor Shantz, seconded by Councillor McMillan. All those in favor? And that's carried. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? Seeing none. There are no resolutions to come forward from closed. Can I have a motion that the following minutes be adopted as presented? That would be the council minutes from June 29th, 2021, and the special committee of the whole minutes from July 13th, 2021. Moved by Councillor Redekop and seconded by Councillor Shantz. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Okay. This evening, we have the Hopewell Creek Ratepayers Association registered to speak regarding the Mary Hill gravel pit. On Friday, August 6th, Capital Paving filed an appeal. As such, council is not legally permitted to comment, discuss, or take any action regarding the application. Council has decided to listen to the registered delegations from the Hopewell Creek Ratepayers Association. And I have another blurb here to read regarding that. It's just a bit of an explanation of the process. In regards to the capital paving applications, the decision regarding the Planning Act applications for the Township of Woolwich official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment have now been appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal, which was formerly the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. It is anticipated that the application for the license under the Aggregate Resource Act will be referred to the OLT as well. The tribunal will assign a case coordinator to oversee the appeals, through whom all correspondence will be forwarded. Anyone seeking to participate in the OLT process would need to reach out to the case coordinator. All parties and participants will be notified by the case manager on behalf of the tribunal about any dates and times for case management discussions. An initial case management conference will be held to identify those who wish to be parties or participants in the appeal and their legal counsel. The tribunal will deal with both the Planning Act and Aggregate Resources Act appeals jointly, and it is anticipated that the tribunal will ask the parties to scope the issues and/or consider mediation prior to the hearing commencing. The tribunal will then have a hearing where expert witnesses will give evidence, comments heard from participants, and a decision is then rendered on the matters. This process will take months, if not over a year, and parties will need to be available for all the dates and times the tribunal schedules for the appeal. So just before I move on to an explanation of the timing, if I can just get a clarification from staff on how that communication will happen to people who wish to be part of the process. Jeremy, Mr. Vink, is that something you can enlighten us on, just so everyone is aware?
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of council. So
Once the appeal is formally submitted to the Ontario Land Tribunal from the Township, and the case coordinator establishes everything, they will send information to Capital Paving. Capital Paving will be required to, under the procedures, to notify adjacent landowners and all parties wish to be kept informed by letter. They'll receive those letters, and then the board will hear, everybody will be told what dates to submit information by, and when the first date will be held to hear the discussions on the Ontario Land Tribunal, where people can identify themselves as parties and participants. So letters will be coming in the mail via Capital Paving's legal staff at the request of the tribunal. So that's how they'll learn about it, and they are to review that information and respond at that time.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, before we begin, I wanted to explain a new timing feature that we were going to use, but Alex is shaking her head. No, it's apparently not quite working the way we had hoped. So we're going to go back to the old-fashioned way, and Clerk Hummel is going to be our timer. She will, hi Val. She will give you a 1 minute warning when you've got 1 minute left, and then she will indicate when your time is up. And if I can ask the delegates to try to stay within their times, that will make everyone's life simpler. Is there anything you want to add, Clerk Hummel?
Not only that I won't be as smooth as a Zoom timer, but I will do what I can.
Thank you. So delegates, please leave your video turned off and your microphone muted until you're called upon to speak. Once you have finished your delegation, please turn your microphone and camera off again. You may leave the meeting after your delegation is done. If you wish to remain on the Zoom call and watch the remainder of the meeting, you're more than welcome to do that, as long as you keep your camera and microphone turned off. So now we will start with the delegations. We have 5 delegations from Capital Paving and the Hopewell Creek Ratepayers Association, delegates and experts. So our first delegate is Carrie Gallagher. And hi, Carrie, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor, Shantz, and Council. Thank you for providing the Hopewell Creek Ratepayers Association with this time on tonight's agenda, particularly considering the applicant's decision to file an appeal in advance of this meeting. We appreciate the consideration you have shown in the willingness of council to follow due process. We have also heard and understood your requests for succinct presentations that contain only new information. As such, my role tonight is to provide council with a brief community update. To begin, we wanted you to know that the council meeting on July 13th provided hope to our village in the sense that council was willing to roll up their sleeves and work shoulder to shoulder with the residents of Maryhill on the issue of this proposed Shant Station gravel pit. So it's certainly very empowering for our community. The comments by council members at the end of the meeting also served to direct us in terms of next steps to ensure that the proposed pit would not find its way to the heart of our village. To support council's commitment with respect to petitioning the Premier on our behalf, many of our community members have written additional letters to the Premier and Mike Harris beyond the initial 262 sent, several of which I know council has been copied on. Many more signed the petition that Councillor Shantz requested access to in the last meeting. Currently, numbers stand at 1,135, though this number continues to grow daily. On August 8th, a core group of residents in conjunction with the Wellington Water Watchers organized a car rally in the vicinity of the proposed pit. This event was well attended, and Wellington Water Watchers assured residents that our fight to oppose the Shant Station pit was not in vain, given the clear and devastating impact its presence would have. Another resident has continued to keep track of the shallow dug and spring-fed wells within the community, with the count now at 20. More overwhelming has been the support for community opposition to the proposed pit from other small town groups in various stages of fighting gravel pit applications, individuals that have been severely impacted by gravel pit applications that have gone through, and organizations that are working as stewards of the earth, protectors of prime agricultural land, and those who are working to change the incredibly biased nature of the gravel pit application process in general. All agree that on a multitude of levels, the proposed location is not the place for a gravel pit, and many have suggested that there are still a number of legitimate avenues for council to take to act on behalf of the community you have been elected to represent. With significant land use conflicts still at hand, groups have suggested legislation and policy that could be used to support your decision to stand with our community. that I would be happy to share with you later in writing. Additionally, the HCRA met with MPP Mike Harris yesterday, who indicated that he's willing to come to Maryhill, tour the area, and meet those who are impacted. Needless to say, residents remain resolute in their determination that the proposed gravel pit is not compatible with current land use, businesses, homes, and safety in Maryhill for the many reasons that will be stated in this meeting and were very clearly outlined in the July 13th meeting. I'd like to leave you with one final thought before the expert evidence begins that we have secured at your request. It is not uncommon knowledge that when a large corporation sees an obstacle in their path, they can deal with that obstacle in 4 ways. They can apply pressure to the obstacle in hopes it will submit. They can offer the obstacle incentive to stand down. They can ignore the obstacle completely, or they can work with the obstacle to find solutions that would preserve the viability of both parties. Despite how disheartening it has been to learn how easy it is for aggregate companies to drop the grenade of a gravel pit application on a small town and reap the spoils of the devastation it causes, this was never about a single resident versus capital paving. It's always been about the community being opposed to the applicant's choice of location. But given the choices that capital paving has made in dealing with the obstacles that they've faced through this process, ethically and morally, beyond being opposed to the location of the pit, I would not wish for a company like this to take root in our community. Maryhill deserves better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any questions for the delegation? Okay, thank you. Our next delegation is one of the experts, Michael Friend, a hydrologist and hydrogeologist, and you have 15 minutes. Is Mr. Friend with us? Alex, is he on the meeting?
Oh, unmute.
Here we
Okay.
go.
You hear me?
Okay. Yeah, now we can hear you, yes, and we
Okay,
see
all
your
right.
presentation as well.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Okay, I just know now I got part of the screen being covered by this window here now. Oh, there. Okay, all right. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Michael Friend. I'm speaking about the capital paving pit and the concerns pertaining to groundwater. Can everyone hear me all right?
We can hear you.
Okay, super. Thank you. So next slide. So the concerns here, a little brief summary, the uncertainty of geologic and climate uncertainty are the big concerns that I see. The uncertainty affects everything else. And the questions like, will my well dry up? Will the pit flood and contaminate the aquifers? Then questions like impact on surroundings, long-term impacts. Those are all issues that I see coming from a pit like this. So looking at the site maps with the monitoring wells shown in blue. And can you see my pointer here? These are the 5 wells that have been put in by the consulting firm MTE. And the site map in north is being off to the right a little bit at an angle in this particular image. And the 500-meter notification radius in orange. So that's, and then the pit itself with the outline here in dashed red. So, and you can see from this, one thing to point out, Hopewell Creek wraps literally around the entire site, or at least half of it. And then Maryhill wraps on this side, and there's also wetlands in that too, and the golf course down here on the bottom left. So here's the site plan showing the test pits and the cross sections northwest to south, northwest to southeast, and north to south. So I note that the MTE fieldwork focuses heavily on the shallow test pits and shallow monitoring wells. There's a whole pile of test pits here. The cross sections have only one well, and that's this one here, the 650-1528, that extends to bedrock. And interestingly enough, in the MTE table 1 shows various private wells or generally outside the pit footprint. And they're of moderate depth, but only 4 of these appear in the cross section, and that's the north-south one. And so MTE's 2 cross sections oversimplify the picture. So here's the north to south cross section. And again, the deep well showing in the middle here. The geology is the shallow aquifer up here, and that's where the gravel pit will be, or that is proposed to be. And the deep aquifer here, which goes down here. Now, what I want to point out is you can see how the shape, the geology of the deep aquifer is, how it's depicted depends on what cross-section, what wells you have, what boreholes. And that's pretty limited. And the aquitard is green, another aquitard here, and then the bedrock being down here. So again, there's really only one well that actually goes and shows the deep geology all the way down. Next slide. This is the northwest to southeast cross section. And again, this one does a really good job of showing the pinch outs. The aquitard pinches out here. The deep aquifer itself also pinches out. Again, the aquitard being shown in green, shallow aquifer up here, and lots of test pits. And again, the bedrock down here. So notice that you can get pinch outs both in the aquitard and in the aquifers. So the cross sections show that only the shallow aquifer is sufficiently well defined. And the rest of the stratigraphy, the aquitard, the deep aquifer, and the bedrock really is insufficiently defined. So the conclusion from that is the data sets are adequate for extractive purposes, but not for protective purposes. There's much uncertainty that remains. So the geologic or hydrostratigraphic uncertainty essentials. The moraine type deposits are highly variable, and even within tens of meters, they can influence groundwater movements. You need more field work, and you'd be deeper. Geophysical surveying, more boreholes, all would be helpful. So deep aquifer versus a shallow aquifer. The pit will be in the shallow aquifer only, but as these cross sections show, there's considerable variability, the pinch outs, the geology. So if there's no we can't be certain that there's no connection. So does above the water table mean no worries? Well, the geologic complex uncertainty affects everything. We know very little about Hopewell Creek's interactions with the surrounding aquifers. MTE's fieldwork barely scratched the surface. And the effects of a huge pit right next to the creek, as I showed in the figure there, it wraps around half the site, have not been studied in any depth. So, and the pit will remove material starting just 1.5 meters above the historic high water table. So there's going to be a change to the surface water, groundwater flow regime. So there's going to be a potential for impact on Hopewell Creek. So it's a cold water stream today. Now that's for certain fish species, it's important. But what about tomorrow? And the other question that comes to mind is, what if capital paving were to apply for a below the water table extraction permit in the future? So the climate uncertainty comes on top of the geologic uncertainty. And the Aggregate Resources Act does not touch on any of these synergies. So the pit floor has to be 1.5 meters above the historic high water table. But the problem is the historic high water table isn't very meaningful given climate change. And climate change is already bringing more extremes. You have record-breaking heat and droughts. The pit and haul roads that come with every gravel pit, they'll need more dust suppression. And the farmers will need irrigation for land that's currently not irrigated. Record-breaking floods. So like, for example, 4 1 in 1,000 year floods occurring in 5 years. The issue of intensity and duration of the rainfall events. It makes a big difference whether you have 100 millimeters of rain dump in 1 hour versus whether you have a gentle drizzle of that same amount over 2 days. Next slide. The extreme drought scenario. Shallow wells could dry up. The combined effect of the pit and the drought. The pit will need water from the wells or from the creek for dust suppression and for aggregate washing. This will compete with private wells. So, and in the future, all the farmland might need irrigation. So that could conflict with the private wells too. Yes, the shallow wells could be deepened into the deep aquifer, but who will pay? So this is a map of all the wells. This is from the Ontario MOE. There's again the 500-meter study zone and that MTE used. And this is again the outline of the pit. And what I want to show here is the wells near the pit are more likely to be affected than those further away. And you can see there's quite a few wells around here. So not only do we have the pit here with wells around, and we also have Hopewell Creek going right here. So we can see there's a lot of groundwater and surface water interaction, things to think about here. So now looking at the extreme rainfall scenario, the water level will rise above the historic high. Now the pit will probably flood, but for a short-term flood, we can just wait until it drains on its own. For more extreme flooding, what are the consequences? Well, the machinery would have to be removed quickly to prevent fuel spills. The fuel tanks underwater could spill through vents. Contaminants could reach contaminated deep aquifer. Again, the geologic uncertainty. The pit would function as a lake sitting directly in the aquifer. This spills contingency plan is not rigorous enough. So there's monthly tank monitoring is a bare minimum. And that leaves plenty of opportunities for undetected leaks, sabotage, mischief. The continuous real-time monitoring with remote surveillance really is needed. Any aggregate pit is effectively sitting in some kind of aquifer. So much is at stake. There's no financial handcuffs to hold capital paving responsible if major problems arise. The real-time pit monitoring really should be mandatory for every pit. And also there's a sizable residential community nearby. And so we must consider the impacts of spills, of flooding, all sorts of other impacts that come with gravel pits. Now let's look at wellhead protection areas. In this map here, I have the outer envelope showing, this is showing for the Maryhill wells here, the town of Maryhill being right in here, and then the proposed pit here, north being upwards, the scale of 1 kilometer here at the bottom. The outer envelope encompasses wellhead protection area D. So that's defined as the time of travel, TOT, within the aquifer between 5 and 25 years. So that's within the aquifer itself. Please note the wellhead protection area, or acronym WIPA, definition does not consider the time it takes for contaminant to get from ground surface to the aquifer. So instead, vulnerability deals with that. I'll touch on that in a moment. What I'm showing here in the map is the Maryhill WIPAs are up gradient of the pit. So the groundwater flowing roughly from north to south. So technically, the WIPAs are not a concern related to the gravel pit technically. That's the argument that can be made. But the problem is the WIPAs are based on modeling for the confined deep aquifer. And the modeling is based on incomplete data, geologic uncertainty. So there's, the WIPAs are uncertain. Next slide. So this is intrinsic vulnerability. This IV reflects the time it takes for contaminant to move from ground surface to aquifer. Here calculated for the deep aquifer because it supplies the regional wells, i.e. the wells in Maryhill here. So let's we get the colors here. And IV indicates the protective effect of the overburden materials on the water supply aquifer. So you have high vulnerability means you have low protection. So currently IV is medium in the southern third of the pit site, and that's with all the overburden still present because the pit hasn't been excavated. So removing more material as is proposed will increase intrinsic vulnerability. So the analogy that I made is a helmet padding. The thicker padding gives you more protection. So intrinsic vulnerability, it's calculated only for aquifers that supply municipal wells. So the concept would also apply to private wells in shallow aquifers. So the general rule of thumb, any shallow well is always more vulnerable to drying out and to contamination than a deep well. So there's very little protective overburden padding with a shallow well. And deep wells are better protected. There's more overburden padding to protect them, like a thicker helmet. Next slide. Looking at the geochemistry for the baseline, MTE analyzed 2 out of 5 monitoring wells. Now they said, well, given that the entire area is agricultural, therefore the soil chemistry should be consistent across the site. The problem with that argument is there could still be variations in soil and cropping, including historic variations. There'd also be variations in soil itself. So it would be better to monitor all 5 wells. Furthermore, the pit extraction work as proposed, it's going to bring changes to the geochemistry. Next slide. So the post-pit restoration, rehabilitation, MTE says 5 years of grass legume cover crop will restore the soil. But topography and hydrogeology has been permanently altered by the pit when it gets, assuming it gets built. That's going to be altered. So the soil is very complex, and what you don't see is very important too. So the soil is not going to be as well drained as before. That has serious implications for agriculture. So, it's a return to high quality farmability. Well, that's the question mark for me. I was unable to find any rehabilitated pits with a long history, over 50 years, of the same standard of agricultural productivity as before extraction. Next slide. So post-site rehabilitation. I note that capital paving will leave after it is made, there's an extra made there, sorry, made its profit. No one will be held accountable for the long-term consequences of rehab efforts. There's no regulations demanding the long-term view, for example, 50 to 100 years and beyond. And there's no financial handcuffs to ensure the quality of rehab. And if the closed pit floods, it will become a lake or some kind of swamp. So it would be directly connected to the aquifer materials. So a long-term concern of contamination. Next slide. So in summary, my key concerns, the uncertainty, the geologic, okay, we need more data, deeper, more boreholes, more geophysics, for geophysics would be useful. Climate.
1 minute warning.
And impacts under extreme conditions. So on private water users, on groundwater system, on potential aquifer contamination, the long-term consequences, the same growth that drives aggregate demand also drives demand for water and food. And both water and farming are impacted by climate change. And the Aggregate Resources Act, ARA, does not reflect today's realities, and it needs an update. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions for the delegation? And I'll remind council that we're not going to get into any discussion or opinions, just strictly for clarification. Councillor Shantz, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Mayor, to the delegate. Can we put slide 5 up and then also slide 17 after that? Is that possible?
Yeah, I'm happy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Slide 5 and 17, you said?
Yes.
Okay, so let me click on the correct thing here. PowerPoint, share. Okay. All right, I'm just there. Slide, okay. Oh, don't have it. There, okay. Slide 5 first, 7, 6, 5. Okay, that's the one.
Yeah, so that blue dotted line that you see across the top there, what does that indicate? I'm not sure.
Oh, that's the water table, the currently measured water table, where I think that one was actually the high water table.
Okay, thanks. That's what I thought it might have been. And slide 17.
14, 15, 16, 17, yep.
So I see a lot of blue lines on there. Are those other creeks that are feeding into Hopewell Creek somewhere along the line, or where do those other creeks go? Do you know? Okay,
there's Hopewell Creek is as you noted there. There's other creeks, there's small tributaries of creeks going in here. Can you see my pointer, my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, and they go in there. And then there's also some other ones. There's a couple that flow off to the side and a wetland off to the side as well. And then there's one that flows in here. And there's also, not shown on here, there's also tile drains too. There's a different map from the MTE report that shows that describes the details of the drainage that actually flows down here and then flows into Hopewell Creek there. And so that's not shown on there, but these ones here flow here and here and actually flow off this side to the left. So in other words, to the the west there. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks for the clarification. That's all.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Council? Councillor Merlihan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Sean. Through you to Dr. Friend. After the last meeting, I had spoken to the property owner, and part of the conversation, property owner is convinced that the property will be a better, at least prime agricultural land, but better than prime agricultural land. In your presentation here, you say that you can't find, any other properties that have been rehabbed to agricultural use. Is there any merit into the property owner? Is there new ways of rehabbing that perhaps are unknown at this time that will give the property owner that? And he's quite determined that it will become better because of certain attributes of his land, that less aggregate in there will get his crops closer to the water table for better nutrients, I guess. But is there merit in that thinking?
Oh, okay. That's that topic gets into the realm of soil science, soil physics, agronomy, agrology, and that topic. To answer that question fulsomely would require, first of all, more knowledge of the geology to really understand what's there in the first place, like the actual, full understanding of the whole cross-section profile, rather than just because mostly what we know now is just shallow. So that's the first thing. The other question, I guess, would also tie into details of the crop to be planted, which then again is a choice that the farmer would have to make then in the future. But the problem is when you change the geology, you're changing the whole soil profile. So you're taking away a lot of material and you're saying, okay, well, it's really a simplistic way of looking at it. Say, okay, well, we're going to remove the aggregate, and the plants are now closer to the water table. Therefore, suddenly they'll have more water. You don't need to irrigate, and they should grow better. Well, that's simplistic, because what's an aquifer also functions as, for soil drainage, but it also just functions in how the whole dynamics of the soil works and overall. So various ways of rehabilitating. I mean, MTE, for example, said, okay, we'll plant, a certain legume type crop for 5 years. Well, and that can help build organic matter. And, that's commonly used in farming, and, people doing gardening are using the same principle. But the problem is that when you alter something and you don't really know what you're starting with, and you therefore you really can't quite quantify what you're going to have at the end. I think it's sort of risky to say that, okay, we're going to make it better. I haven't, again, as I said, I haven't been able to find a single case of something that's been rehabilitated and actually been at the standard that it was before, and let alone better. So, I mean, somebody needs to, it's basically like, show me the money type of thing. And, I haven't been able to find anything that, really is impressive. I mean, you can rehabilitate it, but what will it be? Will it just be pasture? Like, will it actually be able to grow year after year a crop reliably, or will you have problems with it being too soggy, for example? Because crops need, all crops have a certain range of what they can take. And you don't want it too dry and you don't want it too wet, and that depends on timing and everything. And so, yeah, I mean, I respect the landowner's desire to make it better in the future, but again, I haven't seen anything that really shows anything that's, anything that's shown that has a proven track record. So maybe that's something to ask an expert who is actually a crop agrologist expert. I think there's actually one speaking later this evening. I think Margaret Walton might be able to shed some more light on that. So I think I'll defer to her on that question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Friend, could I get you to stop screen sharing so I can see all of council on my screen?
Oh, okay. All right.
Thank you.
Let me see. Stop. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Are there any other questions before we move on to the next delegate? No. Okay, thank you. Our next delegation is Dr. Dean Fitzgerald, an ecologist with ELM Inc. And you have 10 minutes, Dr. Fitzgerald. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll just try to share my screen here, 10 seconds. Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you and we can see your presentation as well. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for having me here again. I'm going to touch on some topics that are new and build upon some of the things that were said in the past. And so moving forward, this is a consideration, the proposal for the Shant Station pit, and I'm representing the Hopewell Creek Ratepayers Association. Again, thank you very much. So in terms of a schematic about what we're going to talk about here, I'm going to briefly touch on some of my past experience. I did this before, and so I'll be extremely brief. And work from the predicate that some of the peer reviews have identified deficiencies. And so we're going to discuss some of those deficiencies with particular reference to surface waters and how those surface waters potentially impact habitat, water, wildlife, plants, and the residents. And make the argument that the lack of study by qualified individuals means that a proper risk assessment of those surface waters and water wells has not been completed. And then these deficiencies identify that all the boxes are not checked. So as I've mentioned before, I've done quite a number of technical peer reviews of environmental proposals for a large number of clients in the last 20 years. In the last 3 years, I've done a number of reviews for different mines, other gravel pits, a quarry up north, and multiple different house development proposals. And in each one of those situations, I provided expert reviews, both oral and written. And in terms of this particular proposal, I was the senior author on the environmental review. And I also was a senior author on a rebuttal to some of the comments made on the review. So in terms of an introduction, moving this forward, we're building from the perspective that Michael Friend discussed, which
I think we lost you. Dr. Fitzgerald. Excuse me. Did you there?
Hello?
Yeah, well, I can hear you now. You cut out for a wee bit.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. When did I cut out?
Just when you put up this screen.
Okay, so
we'll give you an extra minute.
oh, okay. So let's see here. I just went forward here. So let's just skip on the.
You've cut out again. Dr. Fitzgerald, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me again?
Now I can hear you. I'm not sure what's going on. Do you? I can't see the full screen. Is his camera on? No. Do you have any suggestions?
I am so sorry.
Well, let's give it another try and see what we can do.
So maybe we'll just let's see here. Let's try this again. I am so sorry that we're having this problem. I heard from the previous presentation that there was some audio problems as well that started during the presentation, and I apologize for that. So can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the argument with this introduction that we're making to set the stage here is that because the potential interactions between the gravel pit and the groundwater have not been studied, that means the risk to surface water has not been properly completed. And I quoted the Friend and Friend study in the past and in the previous presentation and in the environmental review. And that effectively, one of the quotations was the potential impact of the pit on Hopewell Creek should be recognized as a complex issue that requires reassessment, because that assessment of that creek was not included at all in the proposal. And then similarly, there was not a lot of assessment of possible impacts on water wells, again, because of the basic predicate argument that the proposal would not result in the interaction between gravel and the groundwater table. And so that was the basis for this whole approach that we're taking here. And so how does that connect to the official plan? Well, the official plan says that if there's interactions with the water table, then you have to look at the implications of that interaction. And so in this situation, the official plan requires an assessment of any proposal that could possibly modify or disturb a core environmental feature as mapped in the official plan. And no such studies were done in this proposal because of the basic assumption that there'd be no change in water. In other words, no change in discharge of water to either wetlands or to the creeks. And so in this context here, because of the potential interaction between water and the water table and the proposal, it requires study of Hopewell Creek. Well, there's no study of Hopewell Creek done. And there's also another nearby creek that would probably be also influenced by the pit and the gravel deposits, as Michael Friend also discussed. And there's no studies for that. And so what does that mean? There's no risk assessment of the environmental features that are existing on the core environmental features map, the official plan. So what are we talking about here? So we all know where that is. There's St. Charles Street and Shant Station Road. There's a proposed pit. And the green features on the map are significant wetlands. We talked about those significant wetlands before. And the point here is that if you have a proposed activity that's going to have consequences on the groundwater table, which is possible with this proposal, that means the proposal needs to assess risk from the proposed activity. And so because those core environmental features exist near that proposed pit, they need to study those core environmental features. And again, this was not done by any qualified individual because they said there was going to be no interaction with water. And so what are we also talking about? Well, we're talking about Hopewell Creek. Again, as Michael Friend explained, is very close in proximity to the area of interest. And then in terms of on the left side of the map, there's two branches of an unstudied creek that were never considered in terms of the analysis of risk for the proposed activity. And what does that mean? That means that there's no qualified individuals who looked at either one of those creeks for potential disturbance from the proposed activity. And so here's some pictures of Hopewell Creek in very close proximity to the proposed gravel pit extraction area. And what we see on the picture in the top left is where the water seeps out of the slope of the hill near that house. And there's also a water well near that house. And because groundwater, surface water interaction is so close to surface, I believe that the water well at that home is less than 10 feet below grade. And so why is it less than 10 feet below grade? Because there's massive quantities of water that are discharging from the slope of that hill. And that hill is composed of predominantly gravel. And then that water seeps out to the creek. And so it doesn't take a lot of complex analysis to understand that if you modify the gravel in the area, it's going to have consequences on Hopewell Creek because Hopewell Creek benefits it massively in terms of water volumes. So Michael Friend also talked about the fact that the proposed gravel pit areas in less than 1 kilometer from regional municipal water wells. And the regional official plan specifically says that it does not allow aggregate extraction in close proximity to municipal water wells. And again, Michael Friend got into that, and I'm not going to get into that. So in terms of this particular presentation, the argument I wanted to make is that because of the lack of consideration of the scenario of below water table interactions, there is no risk analysis for the creeks. So there is no disturbance scenario completed for either Hopewell Creek or the unnamed tributaries that were in that map just shown. And what should have they done? A qualified person should have completed a before-after control impact study to establish a baseline and then considered scenarios about changes in the habitat or the water discharge from the proposed activity. But of course it wasn't happen. And it wasn't completed. And so since it wasn't completed and there's no before-after control impact study, what does that mean? It means that there's no way to assess disturbance on any of those creeks. And the only benefit is to the proponent, not to the creek ecosystems. And by the way, it's much cheaper and quicker for the proponent not to bother to complete the studies and just simply say that there's going to be no interaction between the proposal and the creeks of concern. And so what are we talking about getting down to brass tacks? As Michael Friend mentioned, there's a potential for lost water volumes discharging to the creek. Similarly for the unnamed creek that was also in that map. And then there's also potential for degraded water to drain from the creek or drain from the pit to the creek, and similarly drain from the pit to the unnamed creek. And then another important consideration is that Hopewell Creek is classified as a cold water system. And so if the water that's entering Hopewell Creek is warmer than what it is now, that means that there could be a temperature consequence on the organisms that are in that creek. And that means that the possible changes in water quantity or water chemistry have not been assessed by the proposal, because they made the argument that there be no interaction between the proposed activity and the groundwater table. And again, we're basing this presentation on the fact that there may be an interaction that's never been considered. So what should have happened? Well, they should have assessed the common fish and wildlife in the creeks. They also should have assessed the species at risk, such as turtles and freshwater mussels that probably exist in those creeks. I know for a fact that there's turtles and freshwater mussels in Hopewell Creek. I've never sampled the unnamed creek, but it's quite possible they're there as well. Now, in the past, when the Ontario government considered expanding Highway 7, they conducted these sorts of studies. They assessed water flows and water chemistry in Hopewell Creek. They also documented the common fish and wildlife in Hopewell Creek. And they assessed species at risk in Hopewell Creek for the very basic argument that they needed to do a before-after control impact study prior to highway expansion. In this current proposal, they have done no such thing. And
We lost you again. Dr. Fitzgerald, we can't hear
just
you.
are
again.
at risk proposal.
There we go. You've got about a minute left, but we're losing your
Okay,
audio again.
I am so sorry about the audio. I don't know what's going on with the audio. So in terms of a summary for the presentation, environmental and groundwater features are at risk from the proposal, as explained. The gravel deposits do exist below the water table, and the water table fluctuates on a seasonal basis. And there's a good chance that gravel extraction will occur below the water table, if not interact with the water table. And for that reason, the proposed pit represents a risk to Hopewell Creek, particularly because it has not been assessed to date. This pit also represents a risk to the provincially significant wetlands and other habitat features that have also not been assessed in this proposal. In order to be complete and to conform with the Waterloo Regional Official Plan, this proposal needs to complete a risk assessment to all surface waters, including multi-season surveys of animals, plants, water volumes, water chemistry, and water temperature. And of course, that hasn't been done. And what this means collectively is that all boxes have not been checked to assess risks from this proposal. And thank you very much. And I'm so sorry about the audio problems. I'm still unclear of why that's happening.
It's one of the joys of Zoom, I suppose.
Now, if I was in person, I'd be waving my arms and dancing around. And so that would be much more entertaining than having my voice fade in and out.
It would be quite entertaining, yes. We look forward to that on another occasion. Thank you for your presentation. Council, do you have any questions? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I know we do have your presentation here in our package, so we can refer back to your notes. I think we got most of it. There's just that one piece at the end that we lost.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you. Our next delegation is expert Margaret Walton of Planscape. Ms. Walton, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Shantz. I appreciate it. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect. And I will advise you that I'm in the rural area, so subject to rural internet. So hopefully this will go smoothly. So my name is Margaret Walton. I am a registered professional planner, a senior associate with the firm of Planscape. I have 40 years of experience in planning, and my specialty is planning for agricultural lands. And I have worked for municipalities, for the province, for regional governments, and for agricultural federations over the years, working on the management and protection of agricultural land. I was retained by Hopewell Creek Ratepayers Association about a year ago to conduct a peer review of the agricultural impact assessments that were done in support of the capital paving application. So as part of my background work, I reviewed all of the work that was done by the capital paving consultants. I spoke to Sean Coville, who did the peer review on the agricultural impact assessment for the for Waterloo region. And I also spoke to the Waterloo planners and to your township planner. And I prepared a memo that's in your package summarizing my findings. I have done many agricultural impact assessments, so I do have expertise in that area. So I wanted to just touch on the principal points that I made in that memo. My concern was there are standard tests that should be met within an agricultural assessment. And in my opinion, many of those tests were either not met or were not, the analysis was not adequate. The first one that I was concerned about was the consideration of alternative sites. So I do agree, in response to that criticism, which was also found in the peer review done for the region of Waterloo, MHBC responded that the provincial policy statement does not require this, that aggregate is has an elevated status in provincial policy, which I concede it does, but it does not mean that you do not consider alternatives. And the provincial policy statement also directs that where provincial information is available, aggregate resources should be mapped and they should be designated in regional and local official planning documents. And that has been done for the region of Waterloo. The province has mapped the agricultural resources, and both the regional official plan and your official plan adopt the location of what they call mineral aggregate resource areas throughout the region. And those are the areas which should have priority when applicants are looking for sources of aggregate. The site that capital paving has chosen, the Shant Station Pit, is not a designated MARA in the regional or your local official plan. And in justifying doing that, there needs to be an additional level of tests that are done to say there are no alternative sites, and that the impact has been considered and has been found to be sufficient to justify them not going to where the alternative sites have been. In my opinion, that test has not been met. The other test that I found they failed on was in talking about need. There certainly is a need for aggregate across Ontario, that's consistent. And in the reports that I reviewed, they indicated that because of the potential expansion of Highway 7, additional aggregate resources would be needed, and therefore this need was justified. Well, in my opinion, that's not an adequate justification. There are actually mineral aggregate resource areas identified and designated in the official plans, which are much closer to Highway 7. It just struck me that this particular test was not met. With respect to existing land uses, the inventory conducted of existing uses, and particularly the agricultural uses, was totally inadequate. It did not include many agricultural operations, including a multi-million dairy operation, which I'm not quite sure how you could miss. There was also an active greenhouse business that was missed. Now, this was partially addressed in the MHBC's response to the peer review, which also criticized the adequacy of the inventory of existing uses. But even the second round of review, the Hopewell Creek ratepayers identified an additional 16 properties on which agricultural crops were produced that were not identified. 6 of these properties house livestock. So in my opinion, that area was not, that test was not met. Typically, when you do an agricultural impact assessment, your study area is 1.5 kilometers from the boundary of the pit. In this case, MHBC chose 1 kilometer. I don't know why they did not indicate what the rationale for that particular, choosing that particular distance rather than going with the typically proposed 1.5 kilometers. And also with respect to consultation, the consultation, in my opinion, was fairly, there seemed to be quite a reliance on the owner of the property, who of course is a local resident, for information rather than going out for a fuller consultation. It has been the position of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture that agriculture should be identified as a sensitive use when these types of operations are being proposed. Dust can be particularly difficult for farming operations on an ongoing basis. They are not identified as a sensitive use or a sensitive receptor from which setbacks need to be set. I think given especially the size and the value of some of the agricultural operations in the area, this particular point should have been more adequately addressed. Phasing was another concern. The indication is that the proposal will be phased over time, but the time period was stated, and the only way I could figure it out was to do some calculations based on how much tonnage they were proposing. And it seems it's between 12 and 25 years. Now, this property is part of the Greater Golden Horseshoe agricultural system that the province has mapped. This will be addressed as part of the update of the Waterloo Regional Official Plan, but it is a real factor. Taking this piece of property out of the center of a portion of this system is something that should have been addressed, regardless of the fact that the Waterloo plan hasn't identified it, but it's certainly something that should be looked at. And the length of time that the property is going to be sterilized should be considered with respect to the status of the surrounding agricultural area. And finally, I'll speak a little bit to rehabilitation, and I know that our previous delegates mentioned it. Rehabilitation is a challenging question when it comes to agriculture. It's been required for many years as part of aggregate operations, but frankly, it's the length of time over which aggregate operations tend to function means that often the people who were around when the application was approved are no longer around when the activities completed. And frankly, I have seen very little evidence of effective rehabilitation in my career. I am not a soil scientist, but certainly it does not seem to be effective, and a lot of that land simply becomes pasture land or a lower standard of cropland. And recently I included in my memo a submission from the National Farmers that talked about the impact of taking a substrata out from under the soil on which you're doing production. You will alter the state of that land, and it is difficult to replace the way that the water will move through it, the nutrients, the amount of organic material that's in there. So I am highly skeptical that this will be rehabilitated back. It is a provincial requirement, and hopefully there will be sufficient rigor put into it, but I would question whether that's possible. So in conclusion, it's my opinion that the work done did not address the requirements for an appropriate agricultural impact assessment. It does not justify the establishment of this pit on this particular piece of prime agricultural land in the middle of an agricultural area, in the middle of the provincial agricultural system. I think there are other opportunities. To my opinion as a planner, it did not meet the tests that are set out in provincial policy, in the regional official plan, or in your official plan. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm certainly willing to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions for Ms. Walton? I'm not seeing any. I do have a question, and I'm not sure if I saw it in your report or in another report. Do you know that what the quality of the soil on that particular property is rated as?
I believe it's class 1 to 3, which is prime agricultural land.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much for your discussion today. Our final delegate is Susan Campbell. Ms. Campbell, you have 5 minutes. Do we have Ms. Campbell in the room with us?
Mayor Sean, she is in the room. I've asked her to unmute and start her video, but she was having some technical difficulties of having to rejoin. So I'm not sure if that's what is contributing to this.
Okay, We'll give her for a minute or so to try to reconnect then. Okay, we seem to have lost
There.
Ms. Campbell.
There. Can you see me?
I can see you now and I can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I apologize. Just some technical difficulties here. Mayor Shantz and members of council, thank you for listening tonight to the submissions made on behalf of the Hopewell Creek Ratepayers Association and the residents of the township in opposition to the proposed pit. I believe that Carrie has demonstrated just how hard this community has worked to show you that the pit is opposed not out of a selfish NIMBYism, but out of a real concern about what would be lost in this community if the pit goes ahead. At your meeting of July 13th, you recognized that there were outstanding issues and you asked both us and Capital to come back to you with more information. We listened to you and we did just that. We retained our experts to give you much needed information. They were here tonight and I believe that they demonstrated that not all the boxes were ticked in these applications. You also asked us to contact the Ontario Federation of Agriculture to get its input on aggregate extraction on prime agricultural lands. I note that there is a letter to you included in the agenda materials from the OFA. While the OFA does not specifically address this proposed pit, it very clearly states that, quote, OFA recommends that aggregate extraction be prohibited on prime agricultural land. The loss of land from aggregate extraction has a detrimental effect on an area's agricultural economy. Even in situations where the land will eventually be rehabilitated back to agricultural use, the rehabilitation lag has a detrimental effect, unquote. Therefore, quote, the OFA recommends that aggregate extraction be prohibited on prime agricultural land and specialty crop lands. The OFA goes on to address the false notion that aggregate extraction is an interim use. They say, quote, removing parcels of land from agricultural use and the indefinite duration of pits impacts not only the farmer who farms the land, but also impacts neighboring farm operations, as well as the businesses and services that serve them and rely upon agricultural output. Extraction puts lands out of farm use for a decade or more, forever, in the case of below water table sites, unquote. I urge you to give careful consideration to the OFA's letter to you. Capital ignored your request for more information. Despite the fact that you set today's date for a further consideration of this matter, Capital chose to exclude you, the elected representatives of the residents, and it has gone directly to a tribunal that no one voted for. I am now asking you on behalf of the HCRA, and I believe the residents of the community, to stand with us as this matter goes forward. I am asking you to adopt a resolution supporting us at the Ontario Land Tribunal. As soon as possible, the HCRA will apply for party status at the OLT. We hope that the township will join us as we continue our fight against a pit that would destroy almost 100 hectares of prime agricultural land, that would likely jeopardize the wells of surrounding residents, that would damage a provincially significant wetland, and would change this community for the worse in so many ways. Please direct staff of the township to work with the residents of this community who have chosen to live here to raise their children here, to operate their farms and businesses here. Please help us oppose a company with no roots in this community, that has no support in this community, and simply wants to take from the land. As the OFA tells you in its letter to you, quote, land capable of supporting agricultural activities is a finite, non-renewable resource worthy of preserving. We need to keep Ontario's highly productive agricultural land producing food for Ontario, Canada, and the world. Please join your residents in their fight to protect the land that will be the subject of the appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Thank you very much for giving the Hopewell Creek Ratepayers Association an opportunity to speak to you tonight.
Thank you very much. Council, any questions? Okay, thank you. I would like to just make a comment though on one of your points, and that is that we don't have authority to direct planning staff to change their their recommendations. That's one of the professional privileges that they have. And I'm not sure if Mr. Brenneman would like to say anything more about that. We do intend to get legal counsel later in the month to help direct us in where we go from here in the process.
Mayor Shantz, may I just address that? I would never suggest that you direct staff to change their opinion. That's
Okay.
not what I'm suggesting at all.
Okay, thank you. I misunderstood you then. Thank you very
I
much.
would never suggest that.
Thank you. Okay. Very good. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you to the Hopewell Creek Ratepayers Association for putting this together and bringing the information back to us. As I said, we will be receiving legal counsel later this month to sort out where we go as a council from here in this process. It will take definitely months and up to a year or more to sort through all of this. So that is where we go from here. Thank you again. Now we'll move on to our next item on the agenda, which is housing for all. And I will ask Manager of Planning, Mr. Jeremy Vink, to give us an overview. Mr. Vink.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Thank you. So this is a little bit of a different report than some of our typical planning reports. So it is a bit more of a discussion kind of item, but as well as a recommendation from staff. Help move through some of the issues that we've been seeing across not only our municipality, but is this something that we've been seeing across North America's concerns about housing affordability and what to be done about it. This ties right back to some of the policies and the places to grow document from the province, where we are challenged to help address housing and provide an appropriate mix of housing within our communities, and how to provide that full range and housing mix for all income levels across our community. And obviously, as you know, like as you're quite aware, affordable housing is a challenge that we're seeing across the township, the region, the province, the country, North America, as I mentioned. And we're just not hitting where we want to be in affordable housing and how to deal with this. In some ways, there's a variety of reasons why. And part of it is just limitations and just disconnect between government levels. And that's part of what we're going to go through tonight is some of these things, but also there's things we can do as a township to maybe address some of those needs and work through that. So this is where the intent is tonight, is to kind of go through some of this and to get some direction from council of how we can proceed to make things better for our community in terms of housing in general. Affordable housing is a key concern, but housing in its entirety. So what is affordable housing? We're going to get into that in a minute. Affordable housing is generally subsidized, and I want to speak to that differently than attainable housing. So affordable housing is subsidized so somebody can get into the housing market or be part of the housing market in some form or fashion. Attainable housing is someone looking for housing they can afford. Doesn't mean they can't afford it, just means they may be not able to acquire the land, what they're looking for in terms of of ownership. So let's say a single family, a young family is looking for a house with some bedrooms, but they can't afford it because they're not making enough money. But it doesn't mean they can't afford the house they're living in right now, which is maybe just too small for what they have for the growing family. So that means they can't attain the housing they need. So that's unattainable housing. So we want to make sure housing is attainable. So we want to see mixes of housing that people can move through as they progress through their lifestyle, that is attainable for them as they move through their life, whether it's starting out, young kids, older kids, back down as they retire, seniors, to make sure it's attainable for them, whatever market they're in, separate from affordable housing. So what is affordable housing? So Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation has a bit of a housing continuum, which is in your report. It just shows it to you. There's two versions of the housing continuum in the report. One is the linear one that's shown in there on page 94 of your package. Top of page 95 is the housing wheel. The wheel is a little nicer to kind of look at, a little more explainable because it moves you around the circle. Where the top of the wheel is things where there's safety nets, where something goes wrong and you need immediate emergency support. So that's emergency shelters. If suddenly there is devastating, let's say a weather impact or flooding or tornadoes, they need emergency shelter right away, or short-term housing, supportive housing, things along those lines for people who just don't have housing and somewhere they need to go for whatever purpose. And then you move around the circle to longer-term supportive housing, subsidized rental housing, then into rental housing and home ownership. It's kind of the way you move around the circle often. So affordable housing isn't really listed in there, but it's in the area of the green, the subsidized rental housing, and into the area of the rental market, the orange. That's where affordable housing falls in. The region has a definition of affordable housing. It comes from the provincial policy statement. It is based on 2019 numbers, so that's why the numbers don't kind of mesh with 2021. But that'll get refreshed as the region redoes the official plan, their official plan, and we'll get an updated version. The concept is there of the percentage, the 30% of somebody's gross annual income, and the purchase price of a home that would make that affordable. So that's kind of in the report there on page 95. It also talks about it from a rental standpoint at the very bottom of that page is, if someone was to purchase a house at 30%, they could spend about just under $1,400 a month on ownership. But if they're in the rental market, it's starting at $810 for a bachelor, and we'll go all the way up to about $1,300 for a 4-bedroom. That would be affordable. Okay, based on today's 2020 standards, I know that we're not going to find almost anything in those brackets anymore. That's the concern here. And that's where the problem is we don't have that affordable housing. People can't afford the rental sides and that first level in. They can't seem to get into the market. So things have become unaffordable for them. So that's where our challenges lie. Generally, the region has tried to work on that affordability. It's been under their purview, passed on to them through the province. So that's where the region has been working through some of that, but we obviously aren't keeping pace. So who is in need? So the region gave us some of their tenure information and some breakdowns for us. And they looked at things of who is generally in need. This is generally, so there's seniors, Indigenous people, lone parent households, and survivors of domestic abuse. People who, the income levels are somehow lower than most others, and they just can't get into the market often because of certain circumstances. So they are usually the ones most likely to suffer from this problem that they can't get into the affordable housing market, rental or home ownership. And that was running in 2016, about 6% of the population, of the region. So what are those people looking for, generally speaking? Generally speaking, we're looking then to satisfy the needs of those people that we were looking at that time was rentals. People who obviously don't have a home or are looking to afford a home, they're not worried about buying a home, they're still having somewhere to live. So generally rentals are cheaper and easier to work with. So rentals solve the problem. You want a home, you need somewhere to start that gives you your basis. So generally it's the rentals that are in demand. We don't have a lot of rentals either. So that's been another part of the problem. There's just not a high amount of rentals in the region, and the township especially. We do not have a high amount of rentals. And the big needs are 1-bedroom units. There is some needs for 3 and 4 bedroom options, and that'd be more of a family oriented group, like single parents that need the extra rooms, especially. But the biggest demand is the 1 bedroom of units. That's where we're seeing the biggest demand back in 2016. I don't think that has really changed substantially. So what's the township role? As I mentioned, generally it's been the affordable housing has been under the province or the region to oversee. The township has generally been involved just through new development and subdivisions, which is your market housing and which is hopefully attainable housing for most people to say, okay, I can buy this house and I can move to this house and maybe I'll move to that subdivision or this place. It's generally the attainable housing, this market-based housing that we look after providing and developing. And there has been very little connection between the township in terms of providing affordable housing, because that hasn't been generally under our purview, and we haven't had a whole lot of tools to do anything with for affordable housing. So that's why we haven't ventured into it in the past. And that's where you're starting to see why a lot of municipalities are struggling, because they didn't have those tools in the past. So, so we've been basically more focused on the attainable side and trying to provide mixes in our subdivisions. And that's what you've seen. We try to get a bit of variety in types of smaller units, bigger units, but they're mostly all freehold freehold units. You know, there's single semis and townhouses. We're not talking, generally we're not seeing much in the terms of rentals. That was not just happening in Woolwich, as much as we tried to. So that was where the township's role was sitting. And that's why there's a bit of a gap potentially where we're seeing that. So where do we want to provide this affordable housing? If we were to do something, where would we put this affordable housing? Obviously, we're not going to try to put it out into the rural areas because that conflicts with provincial policy. We're not going to put it out there. But we want to put it somewhere where people have access to services. And we want to put it in the areas in the community that we can provide. They provide opportunities for jobs, or just access to just groceries and basic amenities. That's where you want to put this affordable housing, so they have access to get to those items on their own easily without needing to rely on maybe a second vehicle or even a vehicle in and of itself. Anywhere we can make it easier for people who are struggling to afford anything. So we want to give them the best benefit to get going. So we want them in those communities where they have that opportunity. That'd be Elmira, St. Jacobs, and Breslau in our cases. So they have access to all the services they need to get up and going. So what could the township do? So one of the things we looked at is what lands does the township have that we could maybe put towards affordable housing? And going through what we got for lands today, we identified 2 key sites as potential opportunities: the Kiwanis site next to the arena and WMC in Elmira, or the Lunar site, which was proposed for a fire hall, which is in Church Street, just west of the township, just the township offices on the edge. Those are 2 potential sites that we figured met those tests. They had opportunities there that they could solve some needs, and we could do something to help the community get going and help fill some of those needs and take a step where the township has never gone before. Both sites have to address some issues in terms of zoning, as well as potential official plan amendments. Kiwanis site obviously has a building on it which needs to be addressed also and removed at some point. But what we were, as staff, thought is potentially, as these sites, the township could utilize them, work with the region, and through an RFP process, find developers who would create affordable housing on these sites and provide that in perpetuity. And there's different ways that can be done, but basically through an RFP process. Some other municipalities have done similar things, mostly in bigger cities. You'll see them in Hamilton, London have done many things like that. Toronto, etc., have done that type of process. The region has done it also in Kitchener and Waterloo areas, but we have never done it up in Woolwich. But it's something we could work with the region on to help provide some affordable housing, and they would help us go through an RFP process and selecting potential candidates to run such an operation and build it. Just give the staff resources and tell you the timing and just kind of easing ourselves in. Staff is recommending we maybe start with the Kiwanis site. It's a great location. It's not too large. It's a great spot next to the WMC, walkable to the downtown on the bus route. So provide many of those amenities that could serve people who might need that, who would benefit from it from the affordable housing side. And then we could maybe then move forward later on at a later date to the lunar site and consider opportunities on that site if we wish to move forward. But that's just reacting. Let's put it that way. That's reacting to the issues. We haven't gotten progressive. We haven't dealt with the issue. So part of the thing is we need to look at this bigger picture. As from the staff, it's our recommendation to look at this bit bigger picture, and we got a plan. We got to look bigger. We got to deal with this issue in a bigger standpoint and look at everything in a more real overall holistic way. So how else can we do this? What else do we need to do to address affordability and to make our community better in terms of affordability and attainability? So now I'm going to mix the two together because I think they come together in this section here of how we handle things. So about a year ago, just over a year ago, we added in the accessory dwelling units. That has helped. We have had over 20 such units be developed already across the township. That's more of an uptake than we thought we would see. So that's promoting some new rentals as opportunities where many parents have told us that they're able to get their young children to now have a place to live where they couldn't afford to get into the housing market. So they're building a rental unit on their site for them, so that's been helpful. So that's what we're seeing. So that's great. We're seeing the uptake on the accessory dwelling units. Something that's kind of fallen by the wayside though is the rooming, lodging, and boarding house. It's permitted in some of our zones. It does exist, but these used to exist longer time ago. Just nobody seems to be running them, but they did provide a unique opportunity for people who couldn't necessarily afford a house, or maybe they're single, maybe recently divorced, or just single individuals who just didn't need a big apartment or couldn't afford it given their circumstances. The boarding house allowed them to rent a room, and they shared bathrooms and/or kitchen space, and the person who owned the property would maybe run meals. It was a way to make things more affordable and just to give opportunity to people. We don't want to lose sight of that opportunity, and we still would encourage people to do that. So we don't want to take that away from our zoning. So we're going to we want to definitely keep it in there and encourage people to reconsider that as an opportunity, as maybe an income opportunity for some properties, and especially in Elmira where the zoning still allows for it in some locations. New subdivisions. This is the biggest area. This is, like I said, the biggest area we work with as the township often on where we see new housing in big picture numbers. Like I mentioned in the past, we try to see a mix. We try to get a mix. Staff is going to try to work towards us seeing how that mix is going to meet the needs. Generally, we've asked for a mix of like size of lots, as well as, like I said, type of units, so single, semis, and townhouses and apartment buildings. We're going to continue to work on that mix, to continue to work on some different sizes of units with developers to see what we can get to achieve just a variation that people can continue to, as we say, sometimes historically age in place. So you could start there as a child and live there till you're a senior and stay in that same neighborhood if you want to. So you could go through a whole gamut of housing styles if needed be in that community, and yes, types, sizes, rentals, home ownership, etc. So we want to continue that, but we want to make sure we're meeting the needs of the community as we do that. So we got to do a little more work about what that might look like and how we achieve that, and what each community might need. Elmira might be different than Breslau, St. Jacobs might be different than Elmira and Breslau. So we got to do that. Would require some work and analysis to do a lot of that. And we would do that through the official plan process to maybe set policies about what we're trying to achieve in those communities and how we're going to achieve that. Okay. But also we have the challenge where we've been seeking the apartments, where we haven't seen the apartment buildings being built in these new subdivisions. We've set blocks aside, but we aren't seeing those blocks developed for those apartment houses. So as I think council's mentioned, we got to put some ties to this. We got to say, look, we're going to give you an apartment block. If it's in that phase, it better be built in that phase. We need to see this actually happen. Otherwise, we're not solving the problem. We're just sitting there with vacant land that no one's developing. It's not benefiting anyone, and the apartment's not there to solve the problem and the need that's being seen in the community. So we need to be a little more aggressive with the developers to push them to get those apartment buildings in. So we want to see that as part of the registration before they move on to next phases. So we have to set some policies into our official plan that way to push that forward with developers. We could also move into doing what is called inclusive zoning, inclusionary zoning. So the Planning Act has just recently introduced this and given some directions around this. We can move to do inclusionary zoning, which would say if we do a fair amount of, do a housing analysis and do a housing study, we can then determine how much need there is for affordable housing, the exact numbers, and then we can implement policies in our official plans to require developers to provide a certain percentage of development as affordable. Bonus behind that, the reason why it's good that way, also then the developers kind of mix the affordable housing throughout the subdivisions. We don't want just certain areas just with all affordable housing, let's say a certain block in the subdivision, or it's just a certain, only one subdivision has it. We want to mix it throughout the community. We want to give opportunities for people to live in different locations, even with affordable housing. So if we can start seeing in these in each of our subdivisions, that would benefit, I think, the community as a whole, but it spreads it across and gives opportunity. So we need to do a housing study for that. So there and again, we could tie that to our official plan, which we need to do, and then implement policies in our official plan, and then do zoning to include that. So that's called inclusionary zoning. Just so you know, we are doing our scoped official plan review. It's going to come before council in September of this year. Unfortunately, we are not able to do inclusionary zoning policies in that completely. We're going to make it clear we have the intent to do that and would like to do that, but just the amount of study that's required is just not, we're not going to be able to do that for September. So we want to do this in the next round as we update our official plan in 2022 after the region's done their regional official plan update. Other things we can look at just to support the community and those who maybe are less fortunate or who can't afford all these things is providing transit and active transportation opportunities. So we want to make sure, obviously, like I said, people don't have tons of money. We don't have the money to go around to buy maybe 2, 3, 4 cars. So we want to make it easier for people so that they can afford things. So giving the transit options is great. Allowing people to be able to bike or walk to work is important. So that's, we want to build those complete communities in Elmira and Breslau where people can live and work in their community, maybe not need to rely on a car and other costs, right? So we do want to continue to push for those types of opportunities to just benefit our community. It helps them in many senses, but especially for affordability. Tied to that is parking. So if we can have people more dependent on other forms of transportation, we could reduce some of the parking requirements. And if we can reduce parking requirements, it means developers can work better with the lands, and we don't need to see land taken up for parking everywhere. So we can get better use of land for residential purposes or other purposes than parking. So some opportunities there. We could look at playing around with our development charges. This would require some work. Right now, the development charges does exempt a very defined term of affordable housing development. That could be exempt from development charges, but if council wanted to explore changing that up and give some additional flexibility, we could review that under development charges too. If council so desired to look at, say, the downtowns of Elmira or St. Jacobs or Breslau, we could do a community improvement plans where we would encourage rental units, revitalizing some of the housing stock that's there, and giving incentives to see that take place. And therein would be an opportunity to maybe just get some affordable housing in some of our existing areas that are already built. And regardless, staff, as you know, and I think council always were, if we are able as staff and council to continue to move forward with planning applications in the most streamlined, effective process possible, we reduce the barriers, which means development can move along faster, which means we can solve things and there's less costs if there's less barriers. So the better we can get our planning approvals through and move forward, the better it is for everybody, developers and the landowner in the end of the day. So we've got to continue to strive to move through those planning approvals as quickly as efficiently as possible. So there's some opportunities there we want to just go through and just mention that those all have to come together for us to make a better community and provide better housing for everybody clear across the community. We can also work with different agencies within the community to work with them, churches or other Woolwich community services, et cetera, to build better relations, to understand what the concerns are, where the needs are, because they're more interacting with the community than staff are. So they might be able to bring forward information to us that we don't know, and we can get ahead of the curve rather than just always reacting after the fact, but we'll get ahead of the issues and maybe then address them early on in the process and help the areas of the community that need it right off as soon as we possibly can. So working with those groups better can also help improve things for the township also and the community itself. So tied to all this, staff has come to a very long conclusion, a long list of work to do. So obviously, we know the recommendation in front of you is to suggest that staff is recommending that council deem affordable and accessible and attainable housing as a community priority. It is something that we think needs to be looked at, needs to be addressed. And consistent with our strategic and official plan policies, staff would like to, continue to have staff directed to work on achieving the attainable housing, making sure we're achieving that full range and mix of housing in our subdivisions and options within our communities and address those needs properly. We want council to kind of direct staff to prepare an implementation plan. And that implementation plan, which we say community for all or housing for all, I have a long list of items here that we need to address, is working through ways to promote that, to continue to promote the accessory dwelling units, to promote rooming, lodging, boarding houses, to work with the region on looking at opportunities to address the gaps and to provide affordable housing. Work on putting policies in place to better provide that mixed range of housing and subdivisions that we want to see. Making sure we see those multi-unit apartment blocks being built in our subdivisions when we want them as per that stage, not near the end or whenever the developer wants to get to them. We want to be able to do this also in collaboration with the developers. So we want to get together and meet with the developers and the developing community about ways we can help them, and we can work together as township and developers to better meet some of the needs and some of the desires to provide the best products available and opportunities available. So whether with affordable housing as well as just the current subdivisions, it's time to sit back down with them and see what we can do. As part of this, I mentioned a few times, we need to redo our official plan, and we need to address the housing with that. So that would be something we're proposing to do in 2022's budget, to come to council with a discussion on cost to go through starting to update our official plan. And this would follow right after the region completes their regional official plan in early 2022. So we have to bring ourselves back into conformity with their plan, and we make housing one of those components we review intensively. And that would allow us to get into the inclusionary zoning potentially. So also, if we can continue to work with, consult with various groups and agencies, we need to build those connections a bit up again to make sure we're communicating back and forth about the needs that are in the community, whether it's housing or just how we can support those in our community who are in need, so that we can support each and every one of them from the township as well as those community groups' perspectives, how we can work together and solve those needs. So just working through all these, there's a long list, so staff will come back with an implementation report to suggest how we might go about some of these and some timing for these. Obviously, we can't do all of them, and we can't do all of them that quickly. We have limited resources and time, and not everything can be done that promptly, but we will start to set up a schedule, an idea of how we can tackle each of these with a bit of a timeline for council review, and then that allows council maybe reprioritize as we deem necessary with staff to work through those processes. Lastly, we are recommending that council direct staff to initiate looking at the Quantus lands and considering them as surplus, as to move forward with deeming them as surplus and developing them for affordable housing, and going through the RFP process with the region to see some affordable housing on those lands being constructed, and preferably in the shorter term as best we can. And then once we've kind of moved through the Quantus house as a test case, we could come back to council at a later date and consider about maybe looking at that Lunar site on the former, or was proposed as a fire hall, but now is just sitting lands that we own on Kissing Bridge Drive, and look for some opportunities there for affordable housing also. Thank you for listening to me and kind of letting me go through all that. It's a little bit longer than normal, but any questions, I'll do my best to try and answer them, and just look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vink. Questions for Mr. Vink? Councillor Shantz.
Yeah, thank you through you to Mr. Vink, and thank you for the report. It's a very in-depth report, well written, easy to follow. I do have a couple of comments. I don't know whether they're going to be end up questions or just more comments than anything. One of the things that I've noticed, we talk about transit, and our communities are set up that, like you say, Breslau really doesn't have a lot of amenities there for people to stay in the village to do their shopping and that type of thing. Elmira does. St. Jacobs is getting a few more, but they're lacking some areas as well. And I think that's somewhere, some area where we could help. But the GRT, the transit, is set up to get the people from our communities into Kitchener and Waterloo. They're not set up to get the people around our community. And I don't think that helps neither. We do have that, the Kiwanis bus that moves people around the community, but that was an initiative that we set up. But the GRT is designed to get people from Elmira into Kitchener and Waterloo, or St. Jacobs into Kitchener or Waterloo. They're not designed to move people around the community. So I think that's something that we need to talk about. And that is a costly adventure because of the inefficiencies of traveling a long distance and no stops in between. So it's all set up as mileage. So that's a bit of an issue as well. And then the other comment I want to make, and then you can respond if you want, is the parking issue. And you're talking about having less parking maybe for residents and stuff like that in front of houses. But in our developments that we have now, we're really having a hard time trying to park the vehicles that we have, because there's no front yards, so there's no place to park in front of the house. If you can't park in the garage or whatever, and there's no parking on the street. So I don't know how we address that, but I think we've already sized that so that it really makes things tight. We can't hardly get down the streets now. So those are a couple of comments that I saw kind of jump out at me when I was reading the report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shantz. I'm not sure, Mr. Vink, if there was anything you wanted to respond or.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Shantz. Not really major response. Definitely, they're all good points, and they're true points, right? That's where, just on the transit side, we can work with, to advocate for development of the transit in Breslau, moving people around. But beyond just transit as a bus system, what we need to consider is ways we can build developments that people can walk or bike to some of their things that they can use, giving them alternative choices so they don't need to necessarily even rely on that bus. So if we make it easy enough that they can walk or bike to a store, or to get to most of their needs, I think could be helpful too. So that's another way of looking at that. So with walking or biking as opportunities. So that's why if we make a very compact community and we give access to those, that's beneficial too. So that they take the strain off of people needing to pay or just rely on a bus system. But definitely, if we want a better system for people, we do have to do something more like the Kiwanis is doing in Elmira and Breslau, etc. Good point. Parking, I would tie only if we can manage to get people to stop relying on their personal vehicle and we had more transit and more opportunities on that active transportation, walking, cycling. So it would not be a priority at the beginning. So in the implementation plan, it would be further down, only if we could be able to get the communities to work better and more efficiently and not rely on cars as much. If we can't get away from that car dependency, then the parking can't be reduced. So it would tie hand in hand, definitely. But that definitely good points.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the clarification on the parking issue. Councillor McMillan, did you have your hand up next, I think?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Shantz, through you. Thank you, Mr. Vink, for that report. It's excellent. I think this is really important work for our township and for council, and I appreciate you bringing this report forward. I think it's an excellent report. I appreciate all your work. You talk about the definition of affordable and affordable versus attainable. I think your report talks about affordable housing separate from subsidized housing. And I think that's one of the issues that we need to tackle, is just getting the names of the different housing if we're gonna impact this. And I think affordable doesn't necessarily need to be sustainable. It's written in your report. It's not subsidized. It's separate from subsidized housing in your report. And I think that's accurate. I think we need to think of affordable housing as not just subsidized housing. I like your introduction of the use of the word attainable housing. I think that's also an appropriate and helpful term. I think we have to change what we think the needs for affordable housing are. We need affordable housing that's close to amenities, because people who need access to affordable housing do, need transit and need amenities close because they can't all afford cars. But there's also people that are young professionals that have decent paying jobs that can't afford market rate housing right now. And those people have cars. We need affordable housing, not subsidized housing, but affordable housing everywhere, because there are people, seniors that have a steady retirement income and a car. They want affordable housing, that's not necessarily just close to transit, but everywhere. As far as the housing mix, we absolutely need a housing mix. I was glad that you brought that up. Single semis in towns doesn't necessarily create a housing mix, though. Single semis in towns is one form of housing. And if we mix that with things like stacked townhouses, low-rise multi-unit dwellings, and then larger apartments, that together can provide a mix. I think we need to move beyond just subdivisions of single semis in towns. I was happy to hear you talk about larger apartments in our new subdivision. Another point that came up when we were talking about some affordable housing in previous meetings, Mr. Vink, you talked about the will of council previously wanting to maintain low density to maintain a small town feel. And I think we as a council need to decide what creates a small town feel. Is it that low density, or is it a place where we can live, work, and play? And I think we're going to have to wrestle that going forward, starting now, because if we're going to have low density, just single semis in towns, in our small towns, we're not going to have affordable housing. Those types of properties aren't going to be affordable going forward. So I think as council, we need to wrestle with that. I was wondering about housing co-ops, where that fits in. Housing co-ops can be a method of affordable housing that isn't subsidized. You have market-based housing that offsets the cost of some of the subsidized units, but it's subsidized by the market-based rentals and not the government. And then upzoning. We've seen some good projects come to our council that, Mr. Vink, you've done some excellent work on the Church Street project in Elmira and the Ernst Street project in Elmira. So opportunities for upzoning. Are there neighborhoods in Elmira in different areas where upzoning could create some more affordable options for people? So that's the end of my comments. Again, thank you very much for the excellent report.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Merlehan?
Thank you, Mayor Shantz, through you to, I guess, Mr. Vink, but they're just general comments. I have about 3 different points, and if there's something there that you want to comment on, feel free. I'm glad we're having this conversation about affordable and attainable housing and planning for the future. That's something that I've been particularly interested in my 7 years on council. So glad that we're doing this. Going through just one of my points, we were talking about accessory dwellings, and those were the basement apartments, and in some cases, tiny homes could be put in people's backyards and such. I'm just wondering if any thought to like tiny home communities, or like even trailer parks, RVs, or something that we would look at to put in the mix as different opportunities. I know there's an opportunity potentially in Bloomingdale for a smaller type seniors community that could potentially be there, but we've had other opportunities in St. Jacobs, Riverland, where people have come to put, I'm sorry, it's not Riverland, it's something else, I forget, but it's a seniors community. And people were able to do that. So I guess identifying areas where these new formats of housing that there is interest by some people in the community. Not me, but my wife would really like a tiny home, but I don't think I could do that. But that's certainly something that maybe we could look at while we're talking about this. And another thing in your report, you're talking about. Okay, my battery's at 10%, so if I go black, that'll be it. you're talking about people working in the community and not having to rely on transit and being able to walk and bike to work and such. I know in Elmira, employment lands we don't have very many, and I know we have a plan to create some more employment lands that's based around a bypass that could be, 40 years from now. Will that discussion be part of talking going forward with housing and having some sort of employment lands go along with new subdivisions, and just so that people are able to work in their own community if they choose to in Elmira, and having those opportunities for people to do that. And then my last point, Councillor Sean's kind of brought up the transit, which was kind of on my notes. The part of the recommendation is advocating for more transit in Breslau, and I liked your explanation of it. Transit being, more even walking and being able to purchase items in your community that you wouldn't have to rely on transit. So, but my thing was the advocacy for Breslau earlier in the report talked about concentrating on Elmira and St. Jacobs as communities to focus our attention on affordable and attainable housing, just because Breslau doesn't have the amenities at this point. So I'm wondering why that was put in as one of the recommendations. I mean, there's lots of recommendations, but advocating for Breslau specifically just seemed out of touch with some of the information that was provided in your report. So those are just the 3 points that I kind of took away.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vink, did you want to make a comment?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Merlihan. So yeah, the issue with Breslau is obviously we don't have the amenities there. We don't have the stores that other communities have at the moment. We're hoping to see them develop over time. They're just not there yet. So in the interim, if we want to see some affordable housing, we want to give people opportunities to move around. That's why we wanted to advocate for some of the transit in there, that people have that choice to get on the transit, maybe get into Kitchener to get to those items they want. And that would help for seniors or people who just want to stay in Breslau, who want to live in Breslau, but maybe don't want to be in Kitchener, who never lived in Kitchener, have lived in Breslau their life. So it's something just to advocate to help support Breslau to grow as a community, as an urban area. Hopefully we, like I said, we've allocated for some commercial spaces, and hopefully those come forward, and that makes Breslau a more complete community too. And in addition to seeing some employment lands come in Breslau. So hopefully over time, we will see Breslau grow as a complete community a little more so than it is today. But it's just it's in transition. That's just something we want to help encourage that transition to take place in Breslau. But again, some of your other points are, good points. Some of the things we're looking for. Nothing stops some of these tiny home communities from coming in, as long as we have the servicing that we can, there's servicing there and opportunities to come in and put those in certain locations and develop them. Those are opportunities that you just have to find the sites like any other developer to find the right sites to get going on those kind of locations. We don't want to stop them. And that's why with the planning, and that was one of the last points I had come to, is what policies and what can we put in place to allow things so we don't hinder some of these things to take place. So how can we get this and help them move through the process as efficiently as possible once they do come in? So the more we can be efficient with those opportunities, the better it is if we can get them on the right spot. So.
Thank you. Councillor Rennicott, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you very much. Through you, Mayor Shantz, to Mr. Vink. Thank you very much for your thorough report. And I really like your title, Housing for All. I think it's progressive to name it that way, but you also highlight through all the recommendations and sort of dreams that you have that it is a very complex issue, and it will be if Councillor Merlihan said the bypass will come 40 years, well, Housing for All in affordability and attainability might even take longer. But I really appreciate all the work that you did and bringing forth and the complexity of the township official plan and the regional's official plan will take some doing. And yeah, and I like your recommendation of using the Kiwanis House as a test for this kind of housing in Woolwich Township. So thanks again.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Martin, I'm not sure I saw your hand up, but you looked at one point, no? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vink. Just a couple of things. I guess anecdotally, we know we need more housing and that affordable is a moving target. And so some of the stats you had in there, and you alluded to the fact that they're out of date. And so I'm not sure if we even have it, and perhaps Kelly and Kathy in their presentation will help us to identify exactly what the need, or at least better, what the need is today. I think, you know, I used to think too that there's not much rental housing in Elmira. And then I drove around, and the new subdivisions, we don't see the apartment buildings and that kind of thing. But there are a lot of 3-story walk-ups, triplexes, rental units. And I wonder, do we have an inventory of our housing types?
Well, yeah, Madam Mayor. So the region does have an inventory, and then their review realized, you know, they do know roughly how many apartment units are in the township, but they have identified there is still we have a lack of affordable, lack of rental units still. So it's not meeting the targets that we should be hitting or are providing for the community.
So what are the targets and how far off are we?
So the targets, you know, they're a few years old. That's the part of the challenge. So we want to update those definitely. That's why we do that in the official plan review and do a housing analysis. So they identify that we're probably about, I think the number is about 5% below where we should be. We have only about a 2% vacancy rate, which means it's pretty low, which means it's hard to find rental units. So we just need to increase that housing stock. So more work needs to be done because there isn't as much done on the townships as there is in the urban areas of Kitchener and Waterloo. So through that study and analysis, we'll get a better understanding of exactly what we need in terms of mixes. And that's what we want to get into, that good understanding of what our mix needs to be. So we can really hit things and project what we need for the future, not just today, but what we need 5-10 years. And we can start developing and make sure our developments achieve that. So we need more details, the more data to give a good hard number for you.
So I hope that when you're putting that inventory together, that we can look at some of the diversity of dwellings that we do have. And I think Councillor Merlehan, you were alluding to St. Jacobs Meadows, which is a condo type of development that was spearheaded by a local group. There's a number of apartment buildings in St. Jacobs as well. Martin Grove is a mobile home park, trailer park sort of development that's there. We've got our Duke Street apartments here, and I was trying to remember the name for the building that's beside the Woolwich Community Services. There's a name for it, and it's just escaped me at the moment. But we do have. Thank you.
Foundry?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. So we do have some variety of housing, but probably not the percentage that we should have. And so hopefully in the next year or so we can get a little better handle on what exactly our needs are, and maybe even how we can look at some of these other types of housing and incorporate them in other places. We've got a proposal in Bloomingdale, as Councillor Merlehan mentioned as well. I think that's all I was going to add. And we do have 2 delegations. And so I think I'd like to move on to them. And welcome Kelly Christie of Woolwich Community Services and Kathy Harrington of Community Care Concepts to speak to this report. And thank you, Ladies, please turn on your microphone and your videos and begin when you're ready. It's always a pleasure to have you with us and to hear from you. So go ahead.
So I guess I'll go first because I'm unmuted.
That was your hint.
So thank you, Mayor Johnson, council members, and to the Woolwich staff. Just basically, I believe tonight, my purpose, I feel, is just to come forward with a very general comments about the report and to give the support from Woolwich Community Services for the Housing for All initiative. As you know, we work with a lot of low-income earning households within the Township of Woolwich. And in the past year, we had been, or a couple of years ago, we had been part of the Somebody Should Do Something event that was held through Woolwich Healthy Communities. And housing was one of the 4 priorities noted at that time. And also during COVID, we are an active member on the Rural Recovery Coordinating Committee, which also has affordable housing as a priority. So we've had a few meetings separate with housing committees that we initiated through Woolwich Community Services. And through that, those meetings, the need for housing is there. The assessments are done. We know it's been going on for years and years and years. So we know there is a need, and the need is for a variety of housing to meet the many needs of the residents. And this initiative put forward by the staff is fabulous. It does recognize many of the areas, because it's so involved housing. It's such a circle of events. It's all connected, and you have to keep things moving along. And one of the outputs from the meeting with the region is that we need to be shovel ready. We have to have some properties. We have to, we know there's a need for housing, but if we want to receive any funding and supports, we have to have something ready. So that's, zoning, and that's permits and environmental studies, whatever the requests are. And that's specifically, say, for the Kiwanis property, getting that ready. So if there was some funding coming through, any level of government, that we're ready to put in a proposal. Also, through some of the meetings, it was really strongly put forth that we are a unique community. We take pride in being a rural, unique community, and we have fabulous creative expertise within our own communities. And we shouldn't just rely on the region sending forth, expertise or funding, that we can find our own funding. We can find our own creativeness. We know the needs of the community. And once you come together with like-minded people, through creativity and the unique housing initiatives that can take place, can be really outstanding. People know of different projects that happen in BC or Hamilton, or, the Bloomingdale proposal is unique. I wouldn't necessarily say it's affordable for the participants that we support, but I'm really, really excited that this is being moved forward with all the necessary, so zoning and permits and committee groups and we're going to get together with the builders and developers. Jeremy's report is very thorough and takes into all aspects of the housing needs of the township, and we're very, very supportive. That's it.
So I'll add to Kelly's comments and speak more specifically to what we're seeing around the need for seniors. And before I speak a bit about our work at Community Care, I just, the question related to the need in our community. Outside of my day job, I participate on the board for St. James Manor on Donkey Street. And so we have 28 units there, which are not part of the region's subsidized housing. waiting list. But what I can tell you is a waiting list for those units is more than double the number of units that we have available. And it continues to climb. So that just helps to give you a sense of the number of older adults looking for affordable housing. And that's just in the community of Elmira. But I'd like to echo Kelly's comments and really want to thank staff for bringing forward a great report. It's so comprehensive. And I also want to thank Council for the consideration that you're giving to the recommendations that are within the report. So at Community Care, we've spent the past 36 years trying to help seniors to live independently in their own homes across the 3W townships. And just to give you a sense of the number of residents of Woolwich that we would support is, last year we supported more than 1,700 residents of Woolwich Township to stay in their own homes through home support. So it's a large volume. As an organization in supporting people to live independently, we witness firsthand on a daily basis the impact of both housing affordability as well as limited housing options and the impact that has on the health and well-being, particularly for seniors in our community. And for those that, wish to remain in the community that they have a really strong attachment to. I just wanted to highlight some of the work of the World Health Organization. And so they've identified 8 physical and social dimensions that support individuals' ability to age well in a community. And across our region, across the province, across the country and around the world, local governments, individuals and organizations are coming together around this concept of age-friendly communities. And I think that that's something that we need to continue to monitor. Beyond traditional health and community supports, housing is defined as one of those core 8 dimensions of what you need to age well in a community. So some of you may remember back in 2017 when myself and a couple of other members of local agencies presented an age-friendly Woolwich community plan. And that plan was based on a lot of consultation that we did with seniors and key stakeholders across Woolwich Township. The key messages in that plan, and I have all the data behind that if council is interested in seeing that again, we can certainly make it available. Those key messages were also supported through the local community needs assessments that would be done by our colleagues at the CHC. And I just wanted to remind council of some of those key messages that seniors told us, and this was only 4 years ago. So certainly housing came out, no surprise, as one of those top 2 priorities. The second one was rural transportation. So housing and rural transportation were identified by seniors as 2 key areas. But seniors also asked that, we take a look at a full array of housing options. So yes, part of it is affordable from the perspective of low rents, but people also ask for the full range, right? From supportive housing to having, we talked about mobile homes, we talked about, shared accommodation, to take a look at that full arrangement. They also mentioned that adequate supports are essential. So things that, have been mentioned earlier, things like transit connections, easy access to amenities like grocery stores, options for various levels of care and support to be integrated, things that go hand in hand with housing considerations. They asked that housing options need to be integrated with the community rather than on the outskirts. People wanted that walkable lifestyle as they age so that they can stay active and connected in their community. They asked us to explore innovative solutions. So things like intergenerational or congregate living. There's some great examples from around the world of how you can bring people together in shared accommodation with, independent living, but with a bit of supports. And a great interest in repurposing existing buildings or lands. And many seniors have been looking across our community of places that might be possible. But they also identified some really good local practices that we have in Woolwich Township that provide a good foundation for future development. And I hope as I've been highlighting these messages from 4 years ago, that you see that these are key themes that have come forward again in this report, right, that we're looking at tonight. So as a township of which older adults represent a significant portion of our residents, so the latest figure that I could find is that they represent about 18% of our population as compared to 14% across the broader region. As we take a look at a continued focus of helping individuals to stay in the community for as long as they can reasonably do so, and with increasing pressures on other areas of our healthcare system, I really believe, and our organization believes, that it's incumbent upon us all to recognize how we can best help individuals to age well in the community, and also to recognize that the impact that affordable housing, an array of housing options, and adequate supports have in that process. So I wanted to come to council tonight to say that as an organization with a focus on helping seniors across our communities to age well and in place, we want to lend our support and our encouragement to move forward with the recommendations and actions in the report. We're certainly at the table to offer any assistance that we can provide in that process, and would really encourage council to support the recommendations in the report. We look forward to working together. No one person can accomplish this long list of things that we need to do alone. And just on behalf of Community Care, wanted to lend our support to the discussions and to the Housing for All report. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Kelly and Kathy. Are there any questions? No, I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much for coming tonight and speaking to the report. And thanks to both of you for your leadership in the community and the way that you support our most vulnerable. And also thank you for working together and collaborating with each other and collaborating with other groups and with the community. I think that goes a long way to creating a viable community and a community that cares for each other. So thank you.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Okay, there is a recommendation before you. Would someone like to move the recommendation as it is printed, or make some comments or further comments, or what's council's wish here? Do we have a mover for the motion as it's printed? Councilor Merlehan?
I'll move the motion as printed.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councilor Redekop is seconding. Any further discussion? Councilor McMillan?
I'll support the motion as written, as moved and seconded. I was just wondering if there were some good suggestions by council, I thought. So will that be taken into consideration with this if we move it as written before council had the opportunity to comment on it?
Mr. Vink, have you made notes of the suggestions from council, and what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I have made some notes of all the council comments, especially around some opportunities and different types of housing styles. Definitely we will try and coordinate that, and that'll be part of what I would say would fall into that, hopefully into that official plan policies as we do the reviews and try to lead us forward as to different designs and opportunities in the township. In each of the communities. So we'll definitely add that in. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Just for clarity, then, the direction to staff about the surplus lands, maybe I'll ask Val, is that a separate motion? It seems like a separate thing. Let's just, I'll just make that call. We'll deal with the motion to the end of item 15 that's listed in the recommendations 1, 2, 3, and to 15, and then we'll do the surplus land process as just a separate item, if that makes sense. So if there's no further comments, we'll take the motion for 1, 2, and 3. All those in favor? That's carried. And then the number 4 is directing staff to initiate the surplus land process for the township owned lands at the Kiwanis House. And going for a request for proposal and preparing a report. And then considering developing also the lands at 25 Kissing Bridge Drive. So the direction to staff, let's do that as a motion too, I guess. Councillor Merlehan and second by Councillor McMillan. All those in favor? And that's carried too. Thank you. Okay, moving along then. We have a number of items for information. Does anyone want to discuss any of those? Nope, seeing nothing. Motion that council convenes into committee of the whole, moved by Councillor Shantz and McMillan. All those in favor? That's carried. We have a staff report. Ms. MacArthur is going to talk to us about purchase of a fire pumper for the St. Jacobs Fire Station. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor. Through you to council, just presenting the report on behalf of Chief Martin for the purchase of the St. Jacobs pumper. You will notice that there is a small deficit, but when you take into consideration the sale of the existing truck, which there should be a little bit of a surplus left over. And just to highlight in the report that once council, if you approve the report this evening, there would be approximately 300 days for the unit to be manufactured before it be delivered to the township. So with that, I take any questions. I can try and answer them or get some answers from the fire department and respond back.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Martin.
Through you to Ann. I do like a KME truck. I did tour their plant a few years ago in the hills of Pennsylvania, which was a nice outing. But usually when we see a report like this, I think you stated there's 5 people bid on it. We don't see any other companies or values for it. Is there a reason for that?
I think that Richard might be able to jump in here, but I think that's just standard reporting with a tender procedure, is it not, Mr. Patrick?
Mr. Patrick, can you help us out?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. With it being an RFP process, we don't typically show the prices because it's a since there's an evaluation on different criteria where price is just one of them. We don't typically show the prices of the other bidders. We have in the past showed who has actually bid, so you can actually go on our bids and tenders website and you can actually see who actually did the bid. So we could have actually should have included it in this report, but it is public knowledge.
I could share that with council tomorrow if that's your wish, for sure.
Sure. Thanks. Anything else? Someone like to move the recommendation then? Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Redekop. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Motion that the following bylaws be introduced and read a first and second time, and that is a bylaw to amend the township traffic and parking bylaw for near the schools in Breslau, and a bylaw to confirm all actions and proceedings of council today. Moved by Councillor Shantz and Redekop. All those in favor? That's carried. A motion that the committee of the whole rise and report to council, moved by Councillor McMillan, seconded by Councillor Merlehan. All those in favor? Carried. Motion that council confirms and adopts the proceedings of committee of the whole, moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor McMillan. All those in favor? Carried. Correspondence. Does council want to discuss any of the correspondence that we have listed? No. Okay. Public notice. The Council of the Township of Woolwich gives public notice of its intent to consider a procedural bylaw at the meeting on Tuesday, August 24th, 2021 at 7 p.m. And a motion that the following bylaws in the hands of the clerk be read a third time and finally passed, and that they be numbered as bylaws number 47-2021 to 48-2021, and that they be signed by the mayor and clerk and sealed with a corporate seal, and the same ones that we talked about before. Councillor Sean, seconded by Councillor Merlehan. All those in favor? And that is carried. And that brings us to the end of our agenda for this evening. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating. And I guess I do need a motion to adjourn before I kind of summarize it all. Councillor Redekop, seconded by Councillor Shantz. All those in favor? And that's carried. We will meet again in regular session on Tuesday, August 31st. As council, we have a committee on the 24th. So again, thank you to everyone who participated, for those who tuned in on YouTube, and join us again on August 24th for our next committee meeting. Council members and staff, I will remind you to stay connected to Zoom until we receive confirmation that the live stream has stopped. And good night, everyone.